it. So there you go. So that can go in the bin. And then what I want to do, everybody, I'm just going to turn the studio lights on to get rid of the shadows.
Yes, got it.
So that's that.
Can I just chip in a minute, Sharon? There's still quite a few people who haven't muted themselves. If you could all please turn your devices to mute, it would be appreciated. Thank you.
See where it says mute? You to mute it.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
That's it. And it means that, of course, we're not going to be disturbed by the phone ringing or the dog barking or... But please unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question. That's absolutely fabulous. Right, what we're going to do tonight is something a little bit different. I want to throw lots of different lovely techniques at you to give you some clues, and we're going to be working on something like this. This is Glastonbury Thorn, and it's one of my favourite places ever, anywhere. I love it. And I wanted to come into this and use a bit of collage, so tissue, and a little bit of kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, printing effectively. We've got a bit of salt here, but I want to paint a nice realistic sky. And this is Watercolor Ground. I'll explain more about that. And the texture down the bottom is tissue. So we're going to, it's cling film. So we're going to slowly work our way through it, bit by bit. And rather than work as a portrait like this, I'm going to do it in a landscape so that you can see it more readily. My first port of call with something like this, just a basic drawing. And I have my main hill here, the Tor. And this is where I'm thinking about putting my sun. So I'm thinking maybe about a lowering sun. I don't know. We'll work on that one as we go. And this will be my area for the tissue, this through here. And to do that, I'm simply going to grab some PVA glue. I don't need very much. I'm looking at about that. And I want to add the same amount of water. I mean, you can use the glue all on its own, but it's a waste, to be honest. We want it so that it's going to be malleable enough to work across the paper. And just a nice flat brush, any brush will do. I think a round brush is a fiddle. So something like this that's a bit stiffer. And I just want to mix that. Don't get it on yourself because it'll mark your clothing. So when you're mixing it together, just be a little bit careful. I think I'm going to put a bit more water in there. Just a little bit. I want it quite wet. And when you're doing this at home, prepare it the day before because this is going to take a good 24 hours to dry. And you don't want to be in any great hurry. So I'm going to put that there. And then all I'm going to use is bits and pieces of tissue. So I'll just tear them up, pull them about. And what I thought I'd do is try and give the impression of furrows here. Perhaps it's been ploughed. And I want to give the impression by, let me just draw some lines on here to see. If we're looking right in the middle of our picture, our lines are going to be like this. And as we work our way out, perspective will be doing this for us. So you're thinking about the kind of rays of the sun, really. And if I can copy that and echo that with my tissue, I would be a very happy bunny. So what I'm going to do is just come through here and start sticking. So if I wet that, and it's up to me to make the creases. So just squidge it. Pop it on, glue it. You can get hold of that and turn it back over. And I don't need an exact science out of it, but I just want to try and get this movement. And to break it, it's soggy now. All I've got to do is that. Now the paper I'm using is just £140 Bockingford. It's nothing special. and I've made sure that it's glued down well. I've used, this is masking tape, but on the piece that I'm using for tonight, because I'm going, I did one earlier, of course, I wouldn't be able to work into this tonight. And I stuck that down with the brown gummed tape, because I felt that if I did that, I really wouldn't, it wouldn't get away from me. Because we all know what it's like, don't we? Lots of water, lots of glue, and it all suddenly decides that it wants to do its own thing. So I don't want it to. I want to be the boss. So I'm just trying to get these striations along here in the right kind of places. You can fold that back up, doesn't matter. Come through there, just dab, fiddle, touch, use it, enjoy it. Not worried about these transition lines here at all, because by the time we're finished, there'll be enough going on that you won't necessarily see what's happening there. Now, as we come towards us here, that's going to be more direct, heading straight towards us. I just want to fold that over a little bit like that. I'm going to get a hold of that and just pull it. But any tissue will do. I mean, I save absolutely everything here at home. My husband sees me looking at it and he says, no. He says, you don't need that. There is nothing to see here, but actually, you know what? I could always find a use for anything. I have a doll's house, and I get together regularly with a group of ladies, and we make for our doll's houses. We usually have a theme and we all sit and work together. And it means when you're working in miniature like that, that nearly everything that I use in the house, I could find a use for. The little pizza, the white, I don't know what you call them. They stand up in the middle of the pizza so that it doesn't sag and the top of the box doesn't touch the pizza when you buy it and when it's delivered. They're fabulous for tables. They make super duper little doll's house tables. They're 12th scale. But I collect them and the old man says, no, no more rubbish. There you go, look. So it's giving us some good lines. Tuck that and fold it back over. Make sure it's all well stuck. I don't want any bits kind of standing up. I want it to be good and truly gummed on. I'm being very cruel to my brush, you noticed, bending it and pulling it. So please don't use anything wonderful like a sable on that. You'd rue it. You'd regret it. So I'm just using this lovely nylon brush. It'll do. Get hold of that, pushing it back. I want my lines to start radiating out now towards the right-hand corner of the picture. Get rid of that. There we are. And then finally, just to lift some through here. And that will do me. So you see, it doesn't use a lot of tissue, does it? Kitchen roll's not bad, if you don't mind the pattern on it. You do get that kind of imprint come through, but you know, who says that's not of interest? I'm going to put that along there, because eventually I could use that line there as a fence rail coming up and through. So nothing would be wasted. Just look at it and imagine what you could do with it. So that's my very first port of call. Really, really, really give that brush a very good, you know, bang it around in your water, because the glue gets up into the ferrule and it'll stick on your brush and you'll be annoyed with that. So I'm just going to do that and give it a jolly good wipe. And that one I have to put away, because that's going to be no use to me at all tonight, because it's wet and I can't work it. So in true Blue Peter fashion, I'm just going to lift the camera for a minute. In true Blue Peter fashion, here's one that I made earlier. I will show you. Now, this one is lovely and dry. So you're just moving you up a little bit. So hang on, and let's make sure that you are beautifully centered as well as I can get it. Hang on, because I want you to see it properly. Now, what has she done, you say, with, I want it straight. I don't want you feeling odd because you're looking at it sideways. This is amazing. I love this. I love doing this. This is all dry. It really is dry. That's not going anywhere. And what I've done here, these are fabulous. Good old Mr. Amazon. Love him. Beautiful little box. And there are these tools that you can use for leather in the main, but you and I, we can use them for our artwork. And they're fab. They're lots, and it's all the letters, numbers as well, a little tiny hammer. All you've got to do is take something, anything, and pop it, look at it carefully, pop it on your paper, and then it will give you an impression. So it's time consuming, but that took me, what, 2 or 3 minutes to do. Glastonbury Thorn. And you can write the words of a poem. So if I could find something about Glastonbury Thorn down there, I could go through here and I could write a line from a poem. Or something else that's lovely to do is to write magic, legend, myth, King Arthur, Guinevere, and just pop it around, because once we start to paint, you'll see that in the paint, and this is what we want. Something.
What are they called, Sharon?
Sorry?
What are they called?
They are, I looked for leather tooling, because you'd use these in basically to tool leather.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
All right, but if you want me to, I can go and I can look myself on Amazon, and I can come back and give you the links for that. All right. If you don't have anything like that and you wanted to give this kind of impression, all you need are the singular little print. You can, let me get it out of the drawer. You can also, if you want to, buy, this is again from Amazon. You can buy these, and they're just, it's the alphabet and letters and symbols, and they're little rubber stamps. So if you didn't want to bother with the tooling kit and you thought that this might be more use to you, they're only about, I think I paid about £10 for these each. And of course a little ink pad, and you can stamp anything on your picture. Make sure that you've got waterproof ink, because then it won't move. But if you like the idea of the ink blending and blurring as you paint, you could do it first and then you could paint over the top, or you could do it afterwards when everything's dry. But that's 2 options for adding a little bit of something extra to your artwork, and I quite like doing that. It makes it different, doesn't it? That's the fun of it. Now, what we need to consider is that this now is PVA, which is effectively a kind of acrylic, and this won't take watercolour very well. So we'll have to later on deal with this. But what I'd like to do first, I'm just considering whether I do that and then paint the sky, but I'll be leaning on it, won't I? Or will I? Will I manage it? This is the big question. I'm going to give it a go. Let's do this first.
Here to answer all your questions on equity release.
Oh.
This is the problem. We make it easy. Our expert advisors will support you every step of the way. We encourage you to involve your family, and we'll leave you to make a decision.
Can somebody turn off their adverts on the TV, please?
With our free online calculator.
Because it's coming through loud and clear about equity release. So whoever's listening to that, can they turn it off, please?
Have you got it?
I think so. It stopped. So.
Golly, righto. Well, that was novel. We know more about equity release than we did. Okay, so I need to do something with this and I have two choices. I can paint that with acrylic, and that works perfectly well. You could just get some acrylic paint out and you could paint your field. And your choices are, you can either have nice brown field if it's newly turned earth. I'm going to paint it this gold colour, and the reason for that is because I wanted to show you this. This is Daniel Smith's Watercolor Ground. It comes in this beautiful gold colour, or you can have it in white. And if you paint this onto anything, they say, you can then paint watercolour onto it. So effectively, you could put that onto a glass, and then you can use watercolour to paint on a glass. Why you'd want to do that, I have no clue, but then that's up to you. But if I had metal, I could paint this on, and then I could use watercolour. So it just gives you options. And for me, with mixed media, it does help. If you want to stick tissue paper onto something like this, because I mean, if you wanted to, you could find patterns tissue paper and printed tissue paper, and you could stick your printed tissue paper down, but it would mean that you can't then put watercolour on it. If you stuck it, you can also stick this down with this. You wouldn't need to use the PVA, you could, but it's expensive to do that with. I wouldn't. Instead of using the glue, I could have gone straight into there with the tissue, but that's an expensive way of doing it. So I wouldn't do that, to be honest. Save your money. It can go on nice new paints. But what I want to do here is just come in to my watercolor grounds, and I'm going to come through and I want to paint this. So I'd like mine to look like fields of wheat, something like that. And this will give me a nice colour and a lovely light area through the foreground. If you wanted a colour that's equivalent to this, you could use something like yellow ochre. Raw sienna's lovely. I like raw sienna very much. It's warm. Burnt umber would be good, but that would be a bit dark. So how about something like raw umber or raw sienna? There you go. And this, I don't know whether you can see it on the camera, has a luminescence. It's gold. It is shimmering gold. So of course, when you tip it and tilt it and turn it, you get the lovely gold colour, the glimmer. So it gives you a really light area through the middle of the picture. There you go. So I'm just going to do that. And again, as I say, I'm not worried about the transitional areas because I'm going to pull other things up and into the colour. But that means now that if I wanted to paint over the top of that, I could. And when this area I'm painting up into that, it will sit on top. So I won't have the problem of this stark hard line there. If you were feeling that you did want to have a softer line in colour there, now that is also sticking in the old brush. But I'll tell you what, my water has got that floating glimmer on the top now, which is lovely. So I can come in.
Sharon?
I'll tip it upside down for a second and you can see the jar, so that if you forget by the time you come back, it will remind you. So I've just popped some water on there to soften that. This is Daniel Smith, you know, the guy who does all the beautiful paints. It's Daniel Smith Watercolor Ground. And this is iridescent gold, the one that I'm using, but you can get it in white if you don't want the colour. And the white one, of course, there's no reason why you could mix colour in with the white so that you have this, your own choice. So that's, you know, worth a thought as well, isn't it? Now, whilst that dries, we need to go somewhere else. And my plan with you is to come up here and to work on the sky. And I'd like to have a really nice summery sky. So I don't really know whether I want to bother with a sun in there. Let's just perhaps have some nice clouds maybe. Let's see what we can do with it, everyone. Colour-wise, I have French ultramarine. I have a little bit of burnt sienna, not sure that I'm going to use that. Burnt umber, a little bit of alizarin crimson. That's Payne's grey. and I'm going to use some Naples Yellow. Snuggled next to it is raw Sienna. So we'll see. He might come into it to pick up on this. We'll see. And this one I wanted to show you. This is Daniel Smith's, again, dear old Daniel Smith, and it's Cascade Green. And it's the most incredible colour. It's made with a cerulean blue and a raw sienna, and the two of them absolutely hate each other. And when you put them on the paper and when you put them in the palette and you put water in it, the two colours split and separate. And I'm hoping that that will give us some very good effects in our greenery later on. One colour I have forgotten and we do want is sap green. I want that zing of sap green. So I'm going to bring that over as well, and somewhere in the palette we're going to plonk a bit of that. So that's the SAA sap green. It's a little bit brighter than Winsor and Newton. We'll give it a try, everybody. You and I will try it together. Let's do the sky. What I do want to do is take some French ultramarine, and I'm going to drop in a little bit of burnt umber. Now these are also two colours that will granulate if you use enough water, but they will make me, I hope, some really interesting clouds. Don't want it too brown. If you add a lot of the burnt umber, it will make you the most gorgeous, real grey and almost black. But I don't want it like that for my sky. I'm looking for this kind of colour, this bruised sky colour. And the clouds have got rain in them. That's what I'm after. Therefore, we'll plonk that there. I'm going to use a large brush to start with. You see, for this, I've actually taped it down with gum tape. I don't want the paper to escape. And I'm just going to use a hake brush because I want to come in here and wet my paper. I don't need it soaking wet, but I want it wet because this will give me breathing time. I'm just coming down to my tool, and it's going to give me time to panic. It's going to give me time to think as I paint. And it means that the paper will, if it's greedy, will soak up the water and not my paint, and hopefully I won't land up with lots of brush marks. I want it shiny, but I don't want it running with water. And you'll notice always when you paint that around the edges where your tape lies, these edges and the corners will always dry out first. So we're going to stop that by just going round the edge. Number 8 brush, this is a sable, number 8, my favourite. And I want to come in now with my French ultramarine, and I'm going to drop in where I'd like some blue sky. So I'm just going to think about where I might like a bit of blue. This paper is quite patterned. You can see the blanket that the paper must have been on when it was made. Look, we've definitely got a pattern there. I've got a puddle there, so I'm just going to have that out. And do be brave, because we all know watercolour, it's a stinker. It will always, always dry up lighter when it dries. It's up to about a third lighter. So if you want colour on this paper, you're going to have to just not be afraid of it and add your colour. So I'm coming in here and I'm being very careful about when I add my colours. So that's very wet, and you see the way it's bleeding. So I'm just waiting for a minute, because I don't want it all to run together. When it all just runs in together, and then you start to mix it. This is when we can land up with mud.
Sharon, are you working flat?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Dead flat on this. In this instance, I actually moved my drawing board so that I would be totally flat. This is Naples Yellow, and Naples Yellow for skies is quite marvellous. It gives you that very light yellowy colour that we see, and it's a good kind colour because it doesn't tend to suddenly go green on you, not like some of your other yellows would. If you accidentally nudged it into the blue, it doesn't immediately go green. I'm using it really, really thinly here. I don't want it too bright. If I use it too bright, it's going to look like a sunset. And I don't think that's what I'm heading for at the moment. It's not really what I'm wanting. So plenty of water. And you see where I'm touching the edges. It's not going green. So I'm happy with that. So just pull these bits of colour through. And it's still shiny. It's still shining. Drier around the edges, but I've still got shine on the paper. I want some of it to stay white, but then I want some really dark clouds in there. So I'm going to just take my dark that I mixed, and I want to bring a big darkie through here. And I'm just pulling that through. So it's still quite wet and it's still bleeding quite a lot. When you've got a blunt end that you don't like, rinse your brush, dab your brush, dab, dab, and don't keep pulling it out. Get hold of it and pull it back. And you'll find you get more control that way. So I'd like to, I didn't make enough of this, I can tell you that for nothing right now. So I'm just going to mix up a bit more. Try to stay away from the water, because if we use too much water, we dilute the paint too much, and then we land up with watery sky. So I don't want to do that either. And I want to drop in a little bit of dark over here. I'm just slowly working my way around my sky. I'd like some in through here. See, there's that horrible blobby end again. So I'm going to rinse and I'm going to dab, dab, and then get hold of it and I'm going to pull it back. Problem's gone. I've got granulation going on over here and I've got the brown and the blue splitting and dividing, which is quite nice. I'd like some very, very fine pale clouds in here. So I'm taking my blue, thinning it down, and then I'm just going to introduce some very pale stuff through there. If there's a blob, get hold of it, pull it back. Now I'm still waiting because I want the shine to go away for a little bit. I need it to be damp. I want it to be damp, but not shiny. I'm going to introduce a little bit of something in there. Get hold of it, pull it back. As you come down the sky and you're looking into the distance, all of these little clouds become thinner, smaller, closer together. You see, that's too wet still. I'm going to just leave that, it's too wet. I want to bring some little clouds through there. Pull them, and we can either pull them to infinity like that, or if you don't like them, rinse, dab, dab, and then pull it back. So it's up to you, you're the boss. I'd like something a bit darker in here. And we're still wet and it's still moving beautifully. It's still bleeding a lot. So again, rinsing it, drying my brush, getting hold of it, pulling it, clean it, rinse and dry, get a hold of it, pull it back. Oh, I've got paint on my brush. Can I do anything with it? Yes, I can. Don't waste a thing. If you think you can get something out of it, do it. There's something in there. Don't like that. So again, this time I'm just drying my brush on my cloth and then coming in. So I did that with a dirty brush. This is all a bit something or nothing. So I'm coming back up there and I want to introduce, now that's drying now. Can you see how that's not bleeding quite as much? So now this is a whole new technique now. This is, I can move it, I can do things with it. And I've just got to be very careful because all of a sudden that will become so dry that if I do any more, I've got wet paint running into drying paint, and that's when I get my cauliflowers. So can I move? Yes, I can come down there. So I'm just working my way through the different stages. If it helps you, have another brush. So I'm going to take a number 6. And I want it damp but not wet. And you see I can come in, and if I want to, I can soften that with the other brush without having to get rid of the paint on this one. Something across here. Now so you can see that looks darker because this is dry. And again, damp brush. Only just damp, everybody, in underneath, soften it, pull it. All these little clouds want to come in there now. And now I can come in and I can paint my distant clouds. That's too harsh, don't like it, get a hold of it, pull it. Call those wind-whipped clouds because they've kind of, the wind's gotten hold of them and yanked them and stretch them. And the key is, do not have your brush too wet now because this is starting to dry. And if we go too, now that's dry completely. See the difference? So again, got to make sure that's really, it's not leaving any residue on my finger. And if I go in underneath and I just soften that like that, just soften one edge, the underneath, and that gives you these lovely little clouds. Let's see if we can do some on this side. And I've got to start being very careful now. This is the stage where if I put my finger on it, I know my finger would come away with colour on it and I'd leave a white mark on the paper. And that's the cauliflower stage. So if you think that's the case, if you could do that, that is the cauliflower stage. Be really, really careful because that's when we all make the messes. So this is quite dry. There we are. And because that brush was wet, I think that's going to cauliflower. So we might land up having to put some trees or something along there. We'll see how it goes. You never know. But I think that sky now is a bit dodgy. I think that if I was to try and get clever with that any further, let's try. I think I might land up with a mess. Yeah, you see, that's, yeah, I don't like that. So I'm not going to touch that anymore now. That's it. That is the proverbial it. So that, we let that dry because it needs to just settle. That means this could be a bit difficult to paint just for a minute. So that's all right. What we'll do is we'll just knit down here and we'll prepare this. And hopefully that can then dry and we can come back up here and work into our hillside. So let's see where we go with this. This down here, what we're going to do, I've got some cling film. This is years old. This was my mum's at home, years old, but I can buy refills for it, so why not use it? What I'm going to do is come into this area here and I want to give the impression of tall grasses that you're looking through to look into your landscape. I want these fingers of grasses to push your eyes up into the rest of the landscape. Therefore, I want darker colours, brighter, you know, dark and bright, because as you come forward into a picture, it gets darker. That's what gives you the distance. Dark at the front, paler as we go backwards into the distance. That's what we need to remember. Here, this is where I want to use my wonderful, I don't know if I'll get away with putting that on there. Should we give it a try? I'll cry in my coffee later. I want to try this Cascade Green. I want to use some of the sap green, and I'd like to bring a little bit of something that's a bit mauvey into it as well for shadow. Therefore, if I take my French ultramarine and I add a little bit of my alizarin, like that, I want this kind of bluey mauve. So I'm looking at this kind of thing. I mean, you might even be able to later interpret that as bluebells. So, you know, that would be okay. I think I want it a bit bluer than that, actually. To be blue. Let's try that. That might do, mightn't it? Let's see. Let's see. Now, what I want to do here is be ready with the old cling film. So that's sitting, waiting tentatively. And all we're going to do is offer up water, because again, I want the paper to absorb the water, not the paint immediately. I want this to have a chance to work with a cling film. And what I want to do with this is, here's the Cascade Green, everybody. So that's going in there. Look at the way it bleeds. And this is a real characteristic of this paint. It just goes for it. And you'll see that on the outer edges, that's bleeding into cerulean blue. Look at that. And if you give it a chance, the middle will granulate with the browns. So I'm going to lay some of that in there, and I want to bring it up. Look, and this is the watercolor ground. It lets me paint into the tissue, which is fab. Here we've got, this is the acidic sap green. I need something a little bit darker into this corner here. I want something quite exciting and dark, so I'm going to have a bit of, that's the sap green, and I'm going to add some French ultramarine over the top of that, just into that corner there. Some into here. Again, it's not terribly important, your colours, because we're going to put the cling film on this, and that will do the work for us. Down here, and then I want to introduce my blue, my bluey purpley colour, which will mix into this. And then a nice clean brush. Instead of me messing about with a dirty brush, a bit more of the blue. There's the French ultramarine. I want to pull that through there, and I'm going to get hold of my cling film. That's a piece off, and this I want to pull it in a very definite, very definite striations like this, to make it look as though it's rushes and grasses. I mean, we're on the Somerset levels here, aren't we, to be honest? So this is all going to be long marram grass, I just thought, and the reeds. And hopefully there are a few reed buntings in there doing their thing. A few reed buntings. What else do you get on the Somerset levels in the grass? Do you get otters down in Somerset? I don't know. Have to keep our eyes open, won't we? See what comes out of the grasses later on. Now, leave that for now. I want to come over to the other side, and we're going to do the same. Now, my blue the paint wasn't thick enough. I want to go into that and make that stronger. And I'll tell you something for nothing right now. The SAA sap green is thin. It's thin paint. So I'm going to go and find some Winsor & Newton sap green. So that's something we've learned tonight. I think that is really very, very weak. So I don't want it. Yeah. Right. So Winsor & Newton sap green. I'll show you the difference. Oh my word. If you have a problem with that, everybody, really brilliant idea that somebody came up with recently is to cut a little bit of silicone mat that we have in the kitchen for cooking, just the corner out of it, and put the silicone mat over the top, and it's brilliant. It allows you to get the tops off these brilliantly. Now, there's a difference in colour immediately, we can see that. So we've learnt something there tonight. We have, let's see, I'll get quite interested with this kind of nonsense. Look, so this is the SAA sap green, and this is Winsor & Newton sap green. Oh yes, look, oh yes. So there's quite a bit of white in this one, which means, that's why it's so pale and yellow, which means that that won't be opaque. That will be opaque rather. Sorry, everybody. That will be opaque, whereas this probably wouldn't be. Right. Okay. I'll be using that for specific tasks in future, not necessarily what we're doing here. So what I want to do now, I'm picking up the blue with the alizarin crimson thick on the brush together. I'm pulling that across like that. And then I want to come into the new sap green. And that's a much better colour to use. Interesting, isn't it? You never know until you try these things. There you go. Jackson's paints do a sap green as well. I wonder what they're like. I emailed them recently because they've asked if the art profile artists would use and promote their range of tube paint. And so I answered and said, well, I don't know, because I'd like to know first what it's like. So can I have something to try, please? And they turned around and they said, oh no, we can't give you anything for free. They said everybody would be asking for it. And I thought to myself, well, there's absolutely no way on this earth that I'm ever going to promote and use and condone anything that I haven't tried and I don't like. So that was the end of that conversation. I just thought that was a very short-sighted, you know, for goodness sake, if you want somebody to tell the world that your paints are good, you need to help a little bit, don't you?
You still use Shin hand paints at all, Sharon?
Oh, yeah, I love the Shin hand paints.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, unfortunately, they've taken them away from the art profile artists.
Oh.
They want us to, I mean, we can still buy them, but we don't get the lovely discounts on them anymore.
Oh, really?
And it's a sad thing. They want us to promote their own paint, but I'm sceptical about, like this with the SAA paint, I'm sceptical about whether I would like it or not.
Fair enough. Thank
And
you.
I'm not prepared to go buying a load of it on the off chance that it turns out to be like the sap green. And then I'm stuck with it because I wouldn't use it. I won't use it if I don't like it, and I certainly wouldn't promote it. It's got to be good to do that. End of story. Okay, I've done that. So that gives me some grasses in the foreground. And what I'd like to do now is just lay in some colour on this hillside. And then I think that would be a very good point for us to have a little break so that this can all dry for you to come back and this can work. With this, I need to have a little think about where I want my light. And realistically, I think because the sky is so bright here, I would be thinking that this might be the light side of my hillside. Therefore, again, I'm going to just lay in a little drop of water. Don't go right up to the edge, because I want that edge to be hard. But I don't want all of this to dry as I paint along. By the time I got to here, this would be dry. So I don't want that to happen. So therefore, I'm just laying in a tiny bit of water along there so that my paint will soften and not dry hard. And therefore, this will be the dark side. This will be the light. Sounds like Star Wars, doesn't it? I'm going to use the sap green, the decent sap green. And I want to come in and lay that in my light side of the hillside. I know that that is all bone dry, so I can come down there. And now we see our Glastonbury Thorn. And I want to pull that along that hard edge, and that's why I didn't want to put water up to the edge. And I want that to be light. So I'm coming through with water. And I'm even thinking I might add a little bit of the Naples Yellow. And to free up my hand so that I'm not all tight, and I'll come up to the end of the brush so that it frees my wrist so that I can give it a more flowing movement. And then I want to bring the darkness down this side. So this is going to be this gorgeous Cascade Green. And if we're very lucky, it might give us some interesting colour splits. So through there, like that. Here we go. Pull that through, and I want to just introduce a bit more thicker colour, so I want a little bit more pigment in my palette. Look how that's bleeding into blue. Can you see that? I hope you can. Loving it. That's the cerulean and the raw sienna fighting each other. If I bring that up through there. Keep the movement of the hill. Don't like these blunt ends, so I'm rinsing my brush, dab, dab, and then I'm coming back and pulling it back through.
Sharon, if you mix those two colours together, would you get the same effect?
Do you know, I really don't know, and I haven't tried, and that might be well worth a try, mightn't it?
Yeah.
You've got to admit that could be well worth a little bash. A bit of dark through there. And then what I'm going to do is take a tiny bit of salt, so only a little. That's too much. And I'm just going to drop it along that transition. But look at the way this has bled up into the green. Tiny bit. You can see the grains there, can't you, that I've put down? So not a lot, because otherwise that'll just be a white fuzzy mess along there. But I want, and it's working beautifully. I have to say, this is one colour, this Cascade Green, that works absolutely beautifully with salt. And I love the way it all bleeds and separates. I can show you, I think I can show you, I can share, can't I? So let's try. Let's have a little try. Bear with me, everybody, for a minute. I'm grappling with technology and I'm trying to win. So here we go. This particular picture, she's just loading. This, I've used the Cascade Green, and you can see, I'm pointing at the picture and you can't see me. All through here, this is Cascade Green. So it's bled into the blue and the brown. And then the leaves that I've pulled up and through, that's the colour used more thickly. And you can see how very, very well it's worked with the salt. It really, really does work well with salt. So from that point of view, it's rather good. No. Hang on a minute, I'm just grappling again. Wait a minute, wait for me. Wait for me. I want to come back to that. Stop share. And I need to make sure that you are still on Spotlight. Hello, everybody. I see we've got 34 people now. That's rather lovely, isn't it? There we are. So we can see now, look how that salt's working. That's really rather terrific. So would you all like to take, what would you like, 10 minutes, quarter of an hour?
Yeah, that sounds great. 10 minutes, I think, would be fine.
10 minutes, okay.
Lovely.
So
Thank you.
if you all come back to me at what, 25 to?
Yeah, lovely.
Brilliant. I'll go and change my water and find a glass of wine, I think. There we go. Okay, so let's see what we've achieved. That's ready, so that can come off. So you see the lovely effect that we can achieve with that. Very nice. I've got a friend who recycles this and uses it again, which I think is very forward thinking, but there you go. I'm not so sure about this, so I'm going to leave it alone for now. I want to come over here and work into the tops of my hillsides, because I would just like to snuggle the hill a bit. And by that, I mean to bring your eye into it. I want to put some trees, distant trees along here, because the levels are all fields with hedgerows, albeit the hedgerows tend to be willow, don't they? The coppiced willow, but I just want to bring something along here to give us an edge. I don't want you to feel as though you're going to walk up the tour and just fall over the edge of the horizon. So to do that, let's have a little bit of our sap green. Let me show you, you can see what I'm doing, can't you? A little bit of sap green, and then I'm turning my brush over, and I'm going to dip my brush also into French ultramarine, and then I'm going to turn the brush again, and then I'm going to pick up some of this Cascade Green, and I've got all of those colours on the brush, and I'm going to try to bring them across the painting as I roll the brush. And you'll find that as you do that, they kind of all mingle. So what I'll do is I'll rinse, and then I'm going to do the same again. Bit of that green, bit of the blue. This time I'm going to also nip up a little tiny bit of the burnt sienna, because burnt sienna, it's a red, and with greens it's very beautiful. It enlivens it, it's complementary colour. So it's quite nice to have a little bit in there. And I'm just rolling the brush, and I'm getting smaller as I come across, as though it's disappearing over the back. Now I want to ground that, because at the moment we've got this hard bottom edge. Nobody wants a hard bottom, so I'm going to rinse my brush, dab, and then come in and just soften that, and that grounds the whole lot. All right, that's a lovely, lovely technique to use for that. I want to do the other side, and the reason I come across from the outer edge so that it's darker, and as it comes into the middle, I've used the paint on the brush and it's fading, which pushes it further away. So that hedge isn't straight to the tour like this, it's actually disappearing off over and into the distance, and that's just what I want. So over here, we'll pick up a bit of the green, that's the sap green, and then I'm turning the brush over for a bit of the Cascade Green, and then I'm just going to kind of quarter it, and I want a bit of the blue. So what happens when I come in now on this side, I'm just really rolling the brush, twiddling it as I come through, bit of a twiddle and a fiddle, and that is called double or treble loading, depending on how much you have. And if I rinse and I dab, dab, and come in again and just soften underneath like that. And then again, get hold of it, pull it back, and you get a nice, tight, neat edge. And you see how that softens your horizon? It's not quite as hard and as harsh and as straight as it was. So that's just what we wanted. Now, salt's worked brilliantly. Really, really pleased about the salt. And all you have to do with that, everybody, is give it a good scrub. Really good scrub. Get rid of it. And then I use a brush to pull it off my work. So that's just a makeup brush. It's really faded over the years, the state of that. But that's a brilliant brush. I use it for rubbings when I'm using a rubber, rather than keep on putting my hands on the work. If my hands get hot and sweaty under the lights, I don't want to transfer that onto the work. You could be fussier even and take your salt off by rubbing it with a tissue. So that's fine as well, if you don't want your hands on it. What I would like to do is perhaps bring across a line of trees from my horizon through here to break up this area here. And again, let's just introduce some of these colours. Let's try this SAA green. Have a bit of that. I'm going to have a little bit of the burnt sienna, and I'm going to have some Cascade Green. Just turn the brush each time I use it. How about a bit of this purple? Should we just a bit of shadow in the trees as well? Let's see how we go. And this time I'm going to do the opposite. I'm coming from close because this is where I want my darker colour. And I'm going to get smaller as I work my way along so that I want trees, turn it, roll it. Don't want to destroy too much of that salt. Don't get a pattern going. That's just green, so I don't want that. So I'm going to reload. And as I'm coming into this lighter area, I need a paler paint. So this time I'm going for this wishy-washy. Don't you dare tell the SAA I called them their horrible. I called their horrible sap green paint wishy-washy. I will deny I know you. And that is Naples Yellow. So what happens now when I come in there with those two colours through that light area and I pop that through? Oh, that really is a nothing coloured paint, you know. Not impressed with that at all. So again, I want to rinse, dab, dab, and then come in underneath and soften and ground it. And the bleeding of the colour almost gives you the shadow underneath the trees. So there you go. I think, you know, that's a little bit too dark there. So I'm just coming in with a damp brush and I'm just going to, in places, pushing up, get hold. So I'm cleaning it, dab, dab, get rid of all the water, and then I'm just pushing up. And that makes those trees just a little bit more interesting because they're a bit too solid. Don't like them quite that solid. That's better. I really don't like this. I think this is rubbish. So this is Winsor & Newton sap green. It's a bit more vibrant. It's got more pigment in it. Okay. And again, bleed that out. All right, so we've done that. Now, this transition period area here is our next port of call. So we need to do something through here and give ourselves trees through that area there. And the same applies. I want to come into my paints, and this time, oh, sorry about that. Somebody's just messaged me. I'm going to double load, treble load again. So there's the green, Winsor and Newton green. Come up here, this time I want a bit more of the burnt sienna. And then I'm going to have a bit of the French ultramarine. It makes a real mess of your palette, sorry about that. We can't help it. And now here is the Cascade Green. Bigger trees this time, because these really are fairly close to us. And I want to come up into this area here. We'll lift some light into these in a minute too. Don't destroy all of the salt. Bring some of it down into the golden area. Pattern, 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 disaster. Get rid of it. Don't get a pattern going, whatever you do, because it just looks nonsense. And then down through here. And it all just pulls your eye into the picture. This is what we're trying to do. And I'm going to get hold of that, and I'm going to spread that a bit further, because I want that green to come into the field. In actual fact, I'm going to pull a bit more through. So there's the sap green pattern here. I've done it again. Don't want that much pattern going on. So let's just do that. And that's not dark enough. So that needs to come in there. Now we need to lift a little bit of this out, because that's a bit solid, isn't it? So again, we dry the brush and we come in and we nudge it, we budge it, and we smudge it. That well-known firm of solicitors. There you go. Come in. Let's get some light in there. Just lift some areas out. Now, realistically, if your sun is up here and your light's coming from across here, these would really, really be in quite dark relief, wouldn't they? But I don't want them so dark that this area of the painting dies. I don't want to do that. And now I want to bring something down through this line here as well. Same applies. We load up different colours, see where we go. Let's have a bit of burnt umber this time. Bit of burnt umber, and then I'm coming into the burnt sienna, a bit of the green, sap green, cascade green, and let's see what kind of a mess we can make with this. Pull that down a little bit. Let's come in here. That's very brown, Sharon. So hold on. Sap green, cascade green, bit of that bright yellow there, yellowy green. Pull that through. And again, the light's going to be shining on some of these here. So these are going to be paler as well, aren't they? Pull them down into this area here. I would like to have a bit more of that acidic green through there. I'm going to get hold of that, and I'm going to pull all of that through there. And this is one instance where that horrendous green probably might do us a favour, drop some light into that field through there. This is the edges of the field where the farmer's got a bit of set aside. That's what that is. That's the hedgerows there. But it gets rid of that hard transition. This is what we want to do. We don't want it to be too much. I can't make these too large, because if I do, I lose this lovely little field in here. What I think I might do here, don't like the way that you can kind of escape into the out of the picture there. So what I'm going to do is come in with another brushful, bit of blue, and I'm just going to lift those up like that. I think that makes that easier to view on this side. If we wanted to do something with this, we could bring another little field line through here of hedgerow. But you know, I like that sweep, and I like the way that's granulated the way it has. You can actually see the raw sienna in there, so I don't want to mess with that too much, I'll be honest. Let's see what's happened here. If we, oh, that's all right. Okay, that's worked. Good, good, good. Now what we need to do is put even more texture in there, because at the moment we've got the lines, not so many here. We need to give ourselves some definition through here. So what I want to do is sneak a smaller brush. So this is a number 4, and I'm thinking to myself that I need to just pull through using all the colours that we've used. Try and keep it sort of harmonious, because if we go mad with this and we introduce different colours now, it's going to look awkward and uncomfortable. So I want to pull through some rushes. You know, if you wanted to, you could introduce through here some it's cow parsley, isn't it? Hold up. Soften this before I get so excited and sidetracked by it all. I'm going to just come in and soften some of this. I don't want it to be too hard. Nestle it into this. If we take a Riga brush, the brain always goes off at tangents, so apologies for that, but then again, we might get something good out of it. Here's the Payne's Grey and Burnt Umber. And with that, what happens if we come up through here and we introduce these seed heads of cow parsley? We see at this time of year, particularly left over from last year, because that's going to draw your eye over to the side of the work and into the front of it. And everything you do, I'd like you to bring it through and into the picture so that everything points up to the tool. If you can leave a gap so that gives somebody a gap to walk through. And then here, I haven't brought my trees right to the middle again, so that gives you somewhere to walk through and to go up and explore. If you cut it all off, you're stopping your viewer from walking in. You can fuzz this a little bit. So again, if I take this is blue, this is the bluey colour. So we can come in here and we can pull across grasses. This would be nice if you did this with a pen. It would give you yet another texture. I would need to do that here because I don't like all these hard edges. And pull it into the middle, pull it across. So that people are looking at, you know, what this is guiding you. It's leading you over there, saying, come and have a look.
What size is that Riga brush, Sharon?
This is a 0.
Oh, so it's tiny, yeah.
Tiny one. And use them. Now, this is up to you. If you want control over how you're working, so for these, I would come up the brush and I would work from nearly the ferrule. But if you want it to be loose and free, come right up to the end of the brush and then you can flick. And I'm using my wrist now, not my fingers, to give myself the shapes. And that's the important thing. That's the difference. So I'm using my whole wrist. I want to give this a little more attention over here. So this is the Cascade Green, and again, wrist work. Like this. You need your paint to do this properly with a Riga brush. You need your paint to be milk to single cream thickness. And a Riga brush is designed to fill the whole of that brush. It's no good dipping the tip in and using it. You've got to lay the brush in the paint, drag it so that you get rid of the drips, and sometimes even have a cloth so that you can just get rid of the excess and then you can paint. All right. Riga brush is developed by Turner so that he could paint the rigging on ships, because of course they were long, thin lines that couldn't be painted with a normal zero paintbrush because it doesn't hold enough paint. So that's why we say that this brush is a reservoir to hold all of that paint. So this fluffies up the foreground and makes it look a little kinder, a little softer. And you could do this with all and any of the colours that you have, like this. But whilst that dries, I am going to nip up here and I'm going to look at the tour. Now, I wouldn't have enough control to do the tour with this, because if I went in there even carefully, the odds are on that that would flick and bend. As I'm trying to draw with it, it would flick and then I'd land up with spots in the sky. I'm not going to do that. For this, I do need to go in there with a really fine brush. So I've got this tiny little, this is called a spotter. So this is a zero, but it's a different kind of zero. Little short brush, tiny short brush for spotting where you want to be. So the hairs are a lot shorter than, I think the cat's been chewing this one. So the hairs are a lot shorter, but that means that it gives you real control. And with this one, I want to grab a little mixture of, this is the burnt umber, and a little bit of the Payne's grey. And I'm using my paint again, single cream. And we want real control over this one, so I'm going to make sure I don't have too much paint on the brush. And it has to be upright. It doesn't lean. Oh, I've done that before now and regretted it. So it's got to be upright and it's not too big, and it does have a vaguely crenulated roof. And there is a definite archway that you can see through. So we get that right. And we do that. I think actually my tour is too fat, but it's going to have to do for now. So when you come up close, you can see that there's a little teeny tiny hole in there to be able to see through for the distance. Now, the other thing I want to do here that's really fantastic to work into this, and one of the reasons that I wanted to do this kind of effect is now I want to come into oil pastels, because given all of this here, we can now introduce a bit of texture to our field. And I'm looking at the colours that I have on here. I'm still not happy with that, you know. I'll deal with it in a minute. It's too hard, this. I'll deal with it in a minute. I want to introduce some of these colours into here, and I love this blue. This blue echoes from the hillside down to here and into here, and so I'd like to bring it into the field as well. And I'm going to use, if I can get a hold of it, this cerulean for that. Now, to temper it, I've also got this rather beautiful green, which picks up again on the Cascade Green. I'll use a little bit of that. And just to lift it, because it is greens, if we drop in some kind of red somewhere, we've already done it to a certain degree, but if we drop in a little bit of red, it really does lift it. It's complementary colour and it will help and make it sing. So I'm going to use the flat of this. I don't want to use the side of it, and I'm just going to mark over some of my lines that I made with this lovely tissue. So I'm just trying to pick up on the creases, basically. Don't want to be too excitable. I don't want too much of it. It's like brass rubbing. So you can see where I've been and what I've done. If you don't like it, you can, and you find it too hard, you can always come in there with thinner, something like the Zest It, and that will soften it. It will emulsify it, and you'll find that you can move it and soften it. But I like the streaks and stripes and the marks it makes. This is a phrase I really don't like. I'm mark making. I never thought I'd say that about my own work, but I'm mark making. We all mark make. The minute we put a pencil on a paper or a brush to an easel, we are mark making. So I'm not sure it means very much to me personally, but that's what we're doing. And we've got that gives us a bit more depth to our field. So that's that blue. And now hither and yon in the darker areas, I want to add a bit of the darker green. And coming into there, through there, I want to add some shadowy colours. That's my darker green, a colour that's almost like the Cascade Green. There we go. There. So that again softens that transition and makes it look more interesting, gives you shadow behind the hedging, and it brings the light in the field to this area here more. So it gives your field depth. And then finally, I'm going to go to my brown. Some of it, just want to pull some of that through. So these are the deep shadows in the furrows. So again, we don't want to do too many, but these will give you the deeper, darker shadows in the furrows without obliterating the blue that we've got in there. So just a few. Paul Daniels used to say, not a lot. Okay. But I'm now liking very much the creases that we've made here on our foreground. What I would like to do is add a bit more dark over here, again, to bring your eye into the picture. It's a really good plan to have dark around the edges of your sky, because it brings your eyes into your picture. So I'm going to pop a bit down there as well. If you find that all this is a bit soft, because some of my tissue is soft, come away from it and go back later on. Put the hairdryer on it, by all means, that works too. So that's fine. That's that out of the way. Now what I want to do down here, if I rinse my brush, I'm going to come into some of this. I just want to nudge it, budge it and smudge it, because I don't like those hard edges on there. Bear in mind you're going to lose all of these scruffy bits when we cut it and we frame it, so you know they'll be gone. And the other thing I wanted to do here to give us a bit more structure in our picture Oh, I smudged that, look. So now I've got to do it. I have no choice. I'm going to take Payne's Grey and Burnt Umber and down through here, incorporating that mess that I've just made. I want to come up through here. And I'm going to put a scruffy old tree. So pull it up and through. Like so. Now, jolly fun technique for this would be to use a straw and put some wet paint down and blow it. That could give you some interesting bits and pieces. Now that's taken into account my smudging, where I put either the paint pot in it or my wrist, could be either. And your decision when you're doing something like this is how far do you go? This is going to be an oak tree, and we know that because oak trees have these very strange branches that curl back down like this. And you've got to look at your picture and decide where your tree is going to go. I could either have just put a shrubby bush in here. I would then either have worked up and over this first hedgerow and brought my tree into this area here, but I can't stop it here. It would look ridiculous and you'd lose your definition. So I had to bring it up into the sky. So I do that with my paintbrush, my thicker brush first. Don't forget, branches do cross over each other, otherwise your trees aren't going to look real. And then I'm going to come back to it. Do you know what I've done there, which is a cardinal sin? I have painted 4 of the wretched things. Don't do that. Just don't do it. 1 or 3, but not 4. Better. And then I'm again filling my brush. This is my Riga brush. And then I would come into all my branches and I would carefully paint in my branches. And I think a Riga brush works best for me if I use it at 90 degrees to the paper. If I try and paint with it sideways, you get a wider brush stroke, and that's not what I'm wanting. I want a thin, fine stroke. So just come in and use your brush on the very, very tip. So it's cack-handed. And if you find it's easier, don't be worried about it. Come into your tree and paint it upside down. Sometimes it's easier to pull your strokes down. And if that's the case, just turn the whole picture upside down. I don't like painting my trees coming into the branches. I don't get the thin stroke here. And I like to be able to gently lift off as I come to the end of the branch so that you get a thinner branch. Because trees are trunks to bough, to branch, to twig. And I find that if I try and do it any other way, I make a mess. So I'm bringing those through, down, over. Just keep working it until you've got a decent tree. Remember as well that it's thicker here and it gets thinner as it comes out towards the ends of the branches. Make sure that it makes sense. So this is nonsense. You see, that's all thin and nasty there. So I'm going to go in, reinforce that, pull it through. This is too thin. That's too thick. This is too thin. It's got to be thick there. So keep moving that, keep working your tree, just on and on and on you go until you're happy with the amount of branches you've got. Oak trees have quite a sort of D-shaped canopy, so I'd need to bring that up and out, but I'd still like to be able to see all of this in the distance, because otherwise you lose it. What's the point in painting it? So we need to think about it. I don't want to go over my tour, over the Glastonbury tour bit, so I'm trying to stay away from that. If you want to, you can be clever, and where your tree is going through the dark areas, you could paint that with the lighter paint, add a little bit of white. Contrast, light against dark, dark against light, all of the time. No excuses, no exceptions. It's the law with paint. With nature too, actually, if you look. When you go in and you study it, nature is the same. So I want to just paint a tree so that I've got something going on there. Now, if this was last year's tree and we still have a bit of residual growth on it, we can deal with that as well. A couple of dead leaves still sitting there. It would be nice perhaps to have a bit of this gold coming through the trunk so that it's not too dark. So that's easy done. We just come in with our brush, and again, we smudge it and we nudge it and we budge it. Just chop it about a bit until you've got some light shining through. And the gold will come through and resonate, which is quite fun. Somebody's standing there actually, doesn't it? So we can add some bushes. That could be, as it stands at the moment, the Glastonbury Thorn. Let's just nudge that. Glastonbury Thorn, what's the Glastonbury Thorn about? There is a tree in Glastonbury that every year flowers in the winter. And the story says that when Christ came to visit England with St. Peter, and they stood and they looked at Glastonbury Tor, St. Peter put his staff down on the ground and leant on it while he stopped to look, and his staff took root. And that is to this day the Glastonbury Thorn. And they've done all sorts of genetic tests on these trees, and there is indeed a thorn tree that blooms in the winter. Not many of them, but they do exist, and Glastonbury has one of them. It's all surrounded nowadays with railings, but that's the legend of the Glastonbury Thorn. Romantic, isn't it? It's nice to think about it. Now, the only other thing I'd like to do with this is to come in and just give it a bit. It's very, very fashionable and fun to have a bit of a flick. So I think that down here, where we've got all this going on, I'm going to come in with, it's very nice of these people, isn't it, to send you these cards to use in shops. I hardly ever do, but I certainly like them for painting. I find them very useful painting. And what I would do with this now is take some of my paint. And again, you need this in kind of single cream consistency. Otherwise it doesn't flick very well. And this is one opportunity for me to use this colour up. And we'll do it in layers. And I want to come in here and give myself some texture. So I'm going to flick. We'll do that too, I think, with a Naples Yellow, because that will make it look like some flowers, I think. I want to flick some green in there because this will look like seed heads and odd bits and pieces. Hang on, clean that, clean the brush. Let's have a go at this Naples Yellow, shall we? Now this is an opaque colour, and it should give us some, yes, that's what I want. There we are. So it breaks it up, makes it look more interesting, brings the gold down into this part of the picture as well. which has got to be a good thing. So you've got harmony. You don't want to land up with 3 different pictures. 1, 2, 3. That's not what we're aiming for. And to flick properly and to get round shapes rather than teardrop shapes, we're going to take the paint. So as I say, single cream, and then don't flick sideways like that, straight down. So straight down onto it. And that should give you a good round blob rather than something. There we are. I'll tell you something else. If you were to do that with a white paint as well, that would be rather pretty. Something else you could do, if it was of interest to you, when this was all wet, before we put the cling film on it, you could have sprinkled just a teeny tiny bit of salt in there as well and put the cling film on that and see what happens with that, because that's quite exciting. And of course, don't forget that when you put your colour down, if you go into a scratchy tool, something that would scratch. So I treated myself to a packet of porcupine quills, and you can find those really easily on eBay. They're only about £5 for a packet of 3. So that gives you 1 for home, 1 for your travelling box, and 1 to lose. And it means that you've got this absolutely really sharp point here, and something a little blunter this end if you don't want to be quite as sharp as this. And this is a fabulous tool. If we'd have put that colour on there and then scratched, you'd have had this kind of effect where the colour goes dark into the where you've hurt it, and that would have given you reeds up through here as well. So you could have done that with this. All sorts of things you could do to play an experiment. Ghost trees. We could have scratched trees in here before we put the colour on, and the paint runs into the damage and gives you a darker line, just like this. So again, lots of different things to play with. But I think I'll leave that there now, because I think any more and I will overwork it if I haven't already. But that gives you a host of different techniques to try and play with, from the sensible right through to the ridiculous. Has anybody got any questions at all on anything that we've done? Or if you'd like to try something, have you thought about how you might like to do it? Any questions?
Sharon, could you tell us a little bit about when not to use salt, please?
Yes, I can. Thank you for reminding me. Salt is a blighter. When you have a very wet, damp day, and if your house is on the damper side, it's not, the heating's not on, so spring and autumn, try and stay away from salt, because you'll find that you put it on your work, and if your work stays damp and doesn't dry at any great speed, the salt just sits there in a muddy puddle, and you don't get these beautiful effects. You have to use it when the paint is in suspension on the paper. If the paper has taken the colour into it, the salt can't bring it back out. What salt does is it takes all the colour around it and soaks it back into itself. It's hygroscopic. It sucks it back into itself. And if the paint has gone into the paper, it can't do that. So that's another very, very good reason to wet your paper first, because then your paper drinks the water, not the paint, and the paint sits there a little bit longer and your salt can work. Really, really important. Do take it off, don't leave it on, because the same applies. If you forget it and you leave it on and you get a really, really damp day, it all goes wet again. And it pulls moisture out of the atmosphere, and that will go wet again, and then it all buckles and your colour can go dirty again. So
Is
just
it table salt or is it rock salt?
that is good old-fashioned Tesco's dirt cheap table salt. This is something you can use rock salt, But this is, let me just sprinkle a little bit so that you can see. This is dishwasher salt. And can you see how it's the most perfect little round bubbles?
Yeah.
Much bigger, but it gives you some of the most stunning effects. If you're painting a dark sky and you want stars in the sky, literally pick up one of those and put it in your sky and you'll get this lovely flare all around it.
Oh, good
So
tip.
dishwasher salt. Again, it's all dirt cheap. You don't need to go buying fancy craft salt. It's a waste of money. Just use what you've got in your kitchen. I use for traveling, I bought one of these little jars of that grind. You know, that the supermarkets are all making them now, little jars of salt, and they've got the grinder on the top.
Yeah.
And I just take that with me everywhere, and I've got that, and I use that when I'm out and about. Try and keep it dry, because again, if the salt gets damp, if you're outside painting and it's a wet day and you've got the lid off your salt, if it gets damp, it won't work because it's already soaked up water from the atmosphere. Okay?
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Sharon,
Yes, yeah.
if you haven't got any pastels, can you just use watercolor on your
Yes,
issue?
yes, of course. Use a nice big brush and keep your paint fairly thick in that instance. Don't use it watery.
Right.
And then I would go into my work sideways like this and just lift the colour on that way.
Okay.
So how about, if we think about that, how about we made this all very dark brown, and then you took some gold acrylic paint and you did that with gold, and that would make it look as though it was a soil ploughed field, and the gold on top of those lines would be the highlights of the sun catching the soil.
That's interesting. I must try that.
So it's worth a thought, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. That brush is really, really elderly. Look how it's blunt. Absolutely blunt. Look at it. Anything else?
Perfect for painting, you know, dry brush on its side like that.
Well, it's really useful. Let me, 2 seconds. If we've got something like this here, and I come into that with, use fairly thick paint, and you might find that you'd need to come into a cloth to make sure you haven't got too much on your brush. And then if you come in over the top, can you see how that's just picking up the light? But
that paper is very textured, isn't it?
yes, but you need a rough paper to do that.
Yeah.
So I haven't really got anywhere I can do that in here. It's dry brush work. So across my tree, I'm picking up the creases in the tissue, which is giving me texture on the trunk of my tree. So actually, everybody, that works really well. Thank you for that, because I'm pleased with that. So that's given me a trunk on my tree. Dry brush work. It's fantastic. Just use the side of the brush. Anybody else? Nope.
I think everybody's lost their voices tonight. Stunned into silence. You've given us so many top tips this evening, Sharon. It's been fantastic. Because, I mean, as I say, you've done so many different courses with us and demonstrations with us. But to learn the tissue bit and the cling film bit and which way to flick your paints using a card, it's all been extremely useful information for everybody, I think. A reminder of what we could, you know, have a go at if we haven't already tried it.
Well, they're all things, aren't they, that we can experiment with, really.
Yeah, I've often thought of using tissue paper and or cling film, but not in the same painting, and I've never actually got round to doing it. But I'm more tempted now, I think, than than before. Yeah, very good. Thank you very much.
Have a go. I
Yeah.
think what I'll do, as I say, I will record it for you. I'll do it properly so
Yeah.
that you have the video
Mm.
to keep. And I'll take a photograph of it as well, and I'll send you that so that you've got both, and people can look at it and use it to paint with or from, can't they?
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much.
You're very
Really,
welcome.
really useful. A lot of great information and some nice colour work as well, I think, tonight. That Cascade Green certainly looks interesting, but I might have a go at trying it with mixing the colours.
Yes, yes. Raw sienna and cerulean blue.
Yeah. But then there's so many different cerulean blues, aren't there? I remember when I did the first one with you with these fantasy sort of sky scenes, and we did moon with the salt and all the rest of it, and I got my cerulean out and you did yours, and mine was such a different colour. I thought, oh, mine's horrible, I don't like that.
Try it with both.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
See what works best. Try phthalo blue, because that's very bright, isn't it? As well.
Which one, sorry?
Phthalo blue.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that might be worth a
Brilliant.
try. Splendid. Well, thank you very much indeed for a very interesting
You're
evening.
welcome.
I'm hoping everybody's enjoyed it. So everyone seems to be very quiet, but so they've not unmuted themselves. But yeah, it's been great. And sorry we couldn't have you in person, but I think everybody felt that it was better to stay on Zoom for another month. And
yes,
hopefully we'll all get back to some sort of normality and have live demonstrations again soon. But it's been a very inspiring evening. Thank you very much indeed.
you're welcome. I'll see you again next time.
Yeah, hopefully, Sharon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.
Bye
Thank
now.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Really good.
Bye.
Sharon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
You're
Bye.
welcome.